The leather of the SUV smelled like his expensive cologne and her silent defiance. 24 days. That's how long he'd been back there. Suit pressed, jaw set, eyes fixed on whatever deal was bleeding money on his screen. And not once had he asked her name. Not once had it occurred to him that she had one. Outside Route 9 was a white scar cutting through nothing. The kind of road that made other drivers slow down, hazard lights blinking. That low-grade panic you could almost smell through the glass. She didn't slow down. She knew this road, knew where it went soft near the shoulder past mile marker 34, knew the way the curve before the bridge was a half-second longer than the map thought it was. She took it at 62. The wipers kept time. Back, forth, back, forth. His cologne hit differently in the cold. Something dark and precise. The kind that costs more per ounce than her weekly take-home. She'd noticed it on day one. She noticed it every day. Not because she wanted to, just because she spent 3 hours sealed inside a box with it. He shifted in the seat, tapped something on his phone, stopped, typed harder. The tires hissed on packed snow. She watched the road. That was the job, the whole job. This route. She didn't answer right away. You took the 9 again. Yes. A pause. He wanted more. He wasn't going to get it. The GPS says 78 is faster. She glanced up at the rear view, just long enough to clock him. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring out the window like the snow had personally offended him. 78 has a jackknifed semi since 6 this morning, she said. Fire crew's still on scene. You'd be sitting in that for 2 hours, easy. Nothing. Then, you could have told me that. You didn't ask. The silence after had a texture to it, not uncomfortable, at least not for her. She'd learned his silences in 24 days. There was the one where he was working and had genuinely forgotten she existed. There was the one where he was annoyed and performing calm. This one was neither. This one was the silence of a man who'd just walked into something and wasn't sure what. The heater pushed warm air low across the floor. Her braids rested against the headrest, tied back that morning, practical, no thought to it, and the dark rope of them showed in the mirror against the pale stitching of the seat. Her hands stayed at 10 and 2. He said nothing. His phone rang. He answered without looking up. 3-word responses. Clipped. Authoritative. The voice of a man who had never once in his adult life been told to wait. The call lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, he dropped the phone on the seat beside him like it had said something he didn't like. Outside, just white and the grey sky pressing down on top of it. The wipers. Back. Forth. Back. It's going to snow harder before we hit the city, she said. He didn't respond. Just so you know. I didn't ask for a weather report. Here's the thing about 24 days of being someone's ghost. You stop performing patience. You still do the job, but you stop bracing for the tone. No, she said. You asked about the route, I answered. I offered the weather for free, my mistake. Quiet. Then, he looked up. Not at the road. At the mirror. At her. She caught it for only a second, his eyes dark still, before she shifted her gaze back to the white line ahead. But it landed. He'd never actually looked at her before. 24 days, 1,000 glances at the rear view, and not once had he looked at the person driving the car. He just did. The road curved. She followed it clean. He didn't look away for another 3 seconds. She knew because she counted them. He didn't go back to his phone. That was the first thing she noticed. The heater had been running for 40 minutes straight, recycling the same sealed air. His cologne, the faint smell of damp wool from her coat, something underneath it all that was just the two of them breathing in a box. The vents pushed heat from the floor and the dash, and it had nowhere to go. The windows were starting to fog at the edges, slow, steady, like the car was closing in on itself. Outside, the snow had doubled, maybe tripled. The road was down to one visible lane, and she'd dropped to 45 without being asked. She didn't explain it. She didn't need to. He was watching, though, not his phone, not his papers, her, or not her exactly, her hands, the way they adjusted on the wheel when the wind kicked, the way she read the road 300 feet ahead instead of 90. She caught it in the mirror twice. Let it go both times. The windshield fogged another inch. She hit the defroster. A low mechanical groan from the dashboard, and then nothing. The fan stuttered. Cut. The fog kept coming, slow and inevitable, eating the edges of the glass. She clicked it again. Nothing. She reached across to the passenger side vent, redirected the airflow manually, and pressed her forearm against the dash to check the temperature gauge. Warm. Too warm. "Is there a problem?" he said. "The defroster's not clearing right. I'm managing it." "Managing it?" he repeated. Not a question, more like he was testing the word in his mouth and finding it insufficient. She didn't respond. She cracked her window 2 inches. Cold air knifed in, sharp and immediate, and the fog on the windshield started to pull back from the center. Problem managed. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "My assistant's sister called the office yesterday." She kept her eyes on the road. "Apparently she's been trying to reach her. Something about a sublease falling through." A pause. "I don't forward personal calls." "Okay." But it was the 3rd time this month. She understood what he was doing. He was letting her know he knew things. That information about her life had reached him, unsolicited, and he'd catalogued it. That was the point. Not concern. Inventory. "I'll handle it," she said. "I'm sure you will." Another pause, calculated. "Is that a recurring issue? Family complications interfering with—" "No." The word came out clean, not defensive, just final. He let a few seconds pass. The wipers worked against the snow. The cold air from her cracked window kept the glass clear. Outside, a truck passed going the other direction, too fast, and the wake of it rocked the SUV a half-foot to the right. She absorbed it without flinching, corrected, kept speed. He noticed that too. "You've been driving in this for how long?" 7 years. "In this region?" "Yes." "And before that?" She checked the mirror. He'd shifted. Not much. Just enough, like he was actually orienting his body toward the conversation instead of conducting it from behind a wall. "Before that I was studying," she said. "Studying what?" "Not what did you study, just what." Like he was flipping through a file. "Civil engineering," she said. A beat. She could feel him recalibrating, the way the air in the car shifted. Not the temperature, just the quality of his attention. The assumption he'd been running on had just developed a crack, and she'd heard it happen. She didn't elaborate, let it sit there in the warm, sealed air between them. "Then why are you—" he started. "Driving you to Westfield at 45 miles an hour in a snowstorm." She kept her voice completely even. "Because right now, this is what I'm doing. And I'm good at it. Which I'd think would be your primary concern given the conditions. The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. He didn't have a move. She could tell. A man like him always had a move. A redirect, a dismissal, another layer of authority to stack on top. He was looking for one and not finding it. The windshield stayed clear. The road stayed under them. Outside, just white, and the low sound of the wind working against the glass. She drove. At some point, she didn't mark exactly when, she heard the soft sound of his phone screen going dark. He'd set it face down on the seat. He didn't pick it up again for the rest of the drive. The transition from 60 miles an hour to 0 felt like a physical weight dropping on the roof. Not a dramatic failure. That was the thing. No explosion, no screeching metal, just a sound like the car clearing its throat, a low knock from somewhere behind the dashboard, and then the engine folding into itself with a kind of exhausted finality. The SUV rolled another 30 feet on momentum alone before she guided it to the shoulder, gravel and packed snow crunching under the tires, and stopped. Silence. The kind that only exists outside cities. Heavy. Absolute. The pines on both sides of the road held their snow without moving. No wind for a moment, just the ticking sound of an engine cooling down too fast. She sat for 2 seconds with her hands still on the wheel, then she pulled the hood release and got out. The cold hit like a wall. -10. Maybe colder with the wind coming off the ridge. Her breath came out in a hard white cloud and vanished. She didn't run to the front of the car. She walked, deliberate, unhurried, and lifted the hood and propped it with the rod, and stood there reading the engine the way someone reads a page they've read before. Inside the SUV, he hadn't moved. She could feel that without looking. Feel the weight of him sitting in the warm back seat, watching through the windshield. That particular quality of stillness that meant he was paying attention, but refusing to show it. She didn't care. She pulled a small flashlight from her coat pocket. She always had one, fourth pocket on the left, and leaned in over the engine block. The cold metal bit through her gloves. She traced the belt housing with 2 fingers. Found what she was looking for in about 40 seconds. A cracked auxiliary belt, half split down the center, barely holding. Not the defroster. The defroster had just been the first complaint. She stood back up, exhaled, pulled out her phone. It rang twice. "Hey." The voice on the other end was warm, immediate, male. "Hey, I'm on 9, past the Marlow exit." She wedged the phone between her ear and her shoulder and reached back into the engine. Auxiliary belt gave out. "You have a spare in the truck." "The Ford?" "Yeah, I think. Hold on." The sound of him moving, something shifting in the background, a door. "You okay? It's like negative death out there today." She laughed, not a polite sound, not controlled. A real laugh, short, sudden, the kind that comes from somewhere unguarded, and it rose up into the cold air and disappeared into the pines. "I'm fine. I've got gloves." "Oh, good, gloves. That's reassuring. Do you want me to—" "Just check the truck, I'll hold." Inside the SUV he'd moved, not out. He hadn't gotten out, but he'd leaned forward, forearms on the back of the front seat, body angled toward the windshield, and he was watching her, not the engine, her. He could hear her voice through the glass, muffled, stripped of the words, just the rhythm of it, the way it changed. The laugh had come through even with 2 inches of glass between them, brief and clear like a stone dropped in still water. He didn't know what to do with that. In 45 minutes of driving with her every morning, he had constructed a complete and functional portrait. Competent, guarded, difficult, immovable. That portrait had been useful. He'd filed her under necessary inconvenience and left it there. The woman standing at the front of his car in -10 degrees, arm deep in his engine, laughing at something some man said on the phone. She did not fit the portrait. He watched her reach further into the engine with her right hand, while the left kept the phone at her ear. She said something. The man on the other end said something back. She shook her head and he couldn't hear why, and that almost laugh happened again, quieter this time, just a shape her mouth made. His jaw tightened. He became aware of the warmth inside the car in a way that felt suddenly less like comfort and more like confinement. "Okay, I found one," the voice on the phone said. "You want me to bring it out? How long?" 40 minutes, maybe 35 if I push it." She looked up at the sky, grey going darker at the edges. The snow had stopped, but the clouds weren't done. "Come," she said, "but don't push it. Roads are bad past the Marlow." "I'll be careful." "I know you will." A beat. "Bring coffee." "Already in the thermos. See you soon." She hung up, stood there for a moment in the cold with her hand still resting on the hood, looking at the split belt. Something in her face. Not softness exactly, more like a drop in pressure. The expression that lives between 2 phone calls when no one is supposed to be watching. He was watching. She let the hood down with a careful click, turned, and walked back to the driver's door. Opened it. Got in. Pulled the door shut behind her, and sat sideways in the seat so she could see him directly. Not through a mirror, not angled away. "Auxiliary belt," she said. "Help is 40 minutes out. There's a blanket in the cargo area if you need it." He looked at her for a moment, then, "Who was that?" She held his gaze without any particular expression. "Someone who answers when I call," she said. She turned back to face the road. Outside, the pines held their snow. The engine ticked itself cold. Somewhere up on the ridge, the wind moved through the trees with a sound like distant traffic. He didn't ask again, but he didn't look away either. The silence of a dead engine is different from the silence of a quiet office. It's heavier. It's honest. The cold didn't announce itself. It just started taking the car back. First the floorboards. She felt it through her boots, that slow absorption of warmth into metal. Then the doors, the windows, the leather seats, losing the last of what the heater had built. The windshield was already half covered, snow piling on the outside in soft increments, narrowing the world down to a white oval that kept shrinking. 10 minutes after she'd shut off the engine, it was already a different car, smaller, more serious. He hadn't spoken since she'd gotten back in. She hadn't either. She was the one who moved first, not toward him, just toward the cargo area, reaching back between the seats to drag the emergency blanket from behind the rear panel. Standard issue, the kind that crinkles like it's made of aluminum foil and sounds ridiculous in any context. She shook it out, settled it over her legs, and went back to watching the snow. The temperature kept dropping. She could hear him breathing. First time she'd noticed that, the specific rhythm of it, slower than she'd expected, steadier than a man who owned 3 companies in 3 states had any right to be in this situation. 3 minutes passed. "There's only one," he said. She didn't look at him. "I know." Another beat. Then, "How long does it take for hypothermia to—" "We're not going to get hypothermia." She said it the way you'd tell someone the meeting was on Thursday, not Wednesday. Flat, certain. "The car still has residual heat. My friend is 30 minutes out. We're fine." He was quiet, but not the working quiet, not the performing calm quiet. This was something else. She turned to look. He was facing the window, his window, the one on his side, and his reflection sat there in the dark glass, overlaid against the white blur of the storm outside. The reflection looked smaller than he did in real life. Something about the angle, the way the snow behind him reduced everything to scale. He looked like a man who had momentarily forgotten which version of himself he was supposed to be. His jaw moved. Once, like he'd started a sentence and swallowed it. She watched the reflection instead of him. Easier, somehow. "You can take half," she said. He turned his head. She was already pulling the blanket loose from her legs, holding one edge out across the center console toward the back seat. It was a reach. Awkward. The console was in the way, and the blanket wasn't large, and the geometry of it was just slightly wrong. He leaned forward and took the edge. Their hands were maybe 4 inches apart in the transfer. She felt the cold coming off his fingers before she felt anything else. The man was freezing. Had been sitting still in a dead car for 15 minutes, and he hadn't said a word about it. She registered that, filed it somewhere. The blanket settled between them at an angle, neither properly covered, both slightly warmer than before. She pulled her gloves off. Her hands were damp from working the engine, and the damp had gone cold. She tucked them between her knees. He watched her do it. "Why did you stop?" he said. She looked at him. "Engineering," he said. Not aggressive, not cataloguing, just asking. Like the word had been sitting at the back of his throat for the last 40 minutes, and the cold had loosened it. She took a moment. Outside, the snow kept coming. The oval of visible windshield was down to maybe 18 inches across. "My mother got sick," she said. "I needed income that didn't come in 3 years. A pause. "Driving paid immediately, and I was good at it." She looked at her hands between her knees. "I kept telling myself it was temporary. And then it wasn't. It wasn't a question." She glanced at him. He was looking at the windshield now, not at her, and there was something in his face that she didn't have a word for. Not pity. She would have shut down for pity. Something more like recognition. "Something like that," she said. He was quiet for a while. Then, "My father calls every Thursday." She didn't move. Same time. 6:15. He runs through the week's numbers like a quarterly review. He paused. "He's been doing that since I was 19. The snow outside made a soft sound against the glass, almost nothing, less than a whisper. "And you answer," she said. "Every Thursday." She thought about that. About a man who built companies calling his son at 6:15 every week to run numbers. About what that builds in a person over time and what it takes apart. "You don't have to," she said, "I know. But you do." "Yes." She didn't say anything else. Neither did he. The blanket sat between them at its awkward angle, and the cold was still there but less present somehow, less demanding, like it had decided to wait. A few minutes passed. Then quietly, like he was aware of exactly how strange it was. "I don't know your name." She looked at the windshield. 21 days, he said. 24, she said. But yes. He waited. She let the silence run for long enough that it had its own weight, long enough that he understood she was deciding, not forgetting. "Nadia," she said. He didn't repeat it, didn't comment on it, just let it settle into the cold air of the car the way snow settles, without sound, without urgency, taking the shape of whatever it lands on. Outside, headlights appeared in the distance, still far. Moving slow through the weather, her friend. 25 minutes, not 30. She'd pushed it a little anyway. Nadia sat up straighter, started pulling the blanket back toward her side. The spell, if that's what it had been, was ending. He didn't stop her, but he held the edge a half-second longer than he needed to before he let go. The spell didn't break. It shattered under the glare of Dex's high beams. The truck came in too fast and too bright, high beams cutting through the snow, flooding the SUV's interior with a cold white light that had no interest in what it interrupted. The engine sound alone, loud, diesel, unsubtle, was enough to change the air inside the car before the door even opened. She was already reaching for the handle. "Stay here," she said. Not to him specifically, just into the air. She got out. Dex was the kind of man who moved like he owned the ground under him. 6 foot something, work jacket open over a thermal, snow in his hair that he didn't bother brushing off. He had the replacement belt in one hand and a steel thermos in the other, and he was already talking before Nadia had cleared the front of the SUV. "Told you I'd make it in 30. It's been 38. Roads are trash past Marlow. I made excellent time, thank you." She took the belt. He handed it off without ceremony, the handoff of 2 people who had done this before, who knew each other's rhythms without having to announce them. He set the thermos on the hood and moved to the other side of the engine block without being asked. Inside the SUV, the man in the back seat watched. His name was still the only thing about this situation he had full control of. He kept his hands folded in his lap, watched through the windshield as she leaned into the engine next to Dex, as Dex held the flashlight at exactly the right angle without being told, as they talked in the low, fast shorthand of people who had built something between them over time. He couldn't hear the words, just the rhythm of them, the ease. At some point she laughed again. Same laugh as before, the one that didn't belong to the woman who drove him in silence every morning. Dex said something with his hands, some kind of imitation, and she shook her head, and the laugh came loose again, a real one, and Dex grinned at it like he'd won something. The man in the back seat looked at his own reflection in the side window for a moment, then looked away. 14 minutes. That's how long it took them to swap the belt, reset the tension and bring the engine back to life. He heard it turn over from inside the car, a clean sound, confident, and watched the hood come down. Dex wiped his hands on a rag from his back pocket. Nadia poured 2 cups from the thermos. They stood at the front of the truck in the snow drinking coffee. Not rushing, Dex reached over without looking and knocked a clump of snow off her shoulder. One motion, casual, the kind of casual that meant he'd done it 1,000 times. She didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge it, just took another drink from the cup. The man in the back seat's jaw tightened. He exhaled slowly through his nose, looked down at his hands. That's when he saw the phone. It was face up on the center console, screen still lit. She must have set it down when she'd reached back for the blanket and forgotten it in the movement of everything that followed. The screen hadn't locked yet. He looked at the 2 of them outside, still talking. Dex was pointing at something on the truck, explaining something she was apparently skeptical about. He looked back at the phone. He shouldn't. He knew that with complete clarity, the way you know something is a bad idea, a half-second before you do it anyway. He leaned forward and picked it up. The photo wasn't hidden. It was right there in the camera roll, the most recent one, taken maybe 2 weeks ago in what looked like a garage or a workshop. Bright fluorescent light overhead. Dex in the frame. No shirt under an unbuttoned flannel, forearm braced on something mechanical. And Nadia, standing next to him, her head tilted back, caught in something between a laugh and a breath. Her hand was on Dex's arm, easy, unthinking. The touch of someone who doesn't have to think about where her hands go. She looked different in the photo. Not happier exactly, just open. Like the version of her that existed when no one was watching. He stared at it for 4 seconds, maybe 5. Something moved through his chest that he didn't have a clean name for. Not quite anger, not quite something else, but hot and specific and directed. He set the phone back on the console, face down this time. Nadia knocked twice on the driver's window before opening the door. "We're good," she said. She grabbed the phone from the console without looking at it and slid it into her pocket. She got in, started the engine, let it run for 30 seconds. Outside, Dex raised a hand in the direction of the SUV, not at her specifically, at both of them or at the vehicle in general, the way you wave at a thing rather than a person. She lifted 2 fingers off the wheel, then pulled out. The truck's headlights disappeared in the mirrors after the first curve. They drove in silence for a while, 2, maybe 3 minutes. The heat was already coming back, pushing through the vents, reclaiming the interior. Then he said, "That happens often." She kept her eyes on the road. "What?" "Him, coming out in conditions like this. When I need him to, yes." A pause. The kind he used to fill with his phone. His phone was face down on the seat. He'd turned it over again without deciding to. "And what exactly is his role in—" "He's my friend," she said. Same tone she used to say you didn't ask. Not angry, just final. A door closing with no particular force, just closing. He looked out the window. The snow-covered trees moved past in the headlights. Dark and indifferent. He had 14 questions he wasn't going to ask. He chose the 14th, the worst one. "He touches you like he knows you." She didn't answer immediately. 2 full seconds. The wipers went back and forth. "He does know me," she said. The heat came back all the way. The leather warmed, the windows cleared. He said nothing else, but his hands, resting on his knees in the back seat, they weren't folded anymore. They were pressed flat, like he was trying to keep something down. The air in the car didn't just feel warm, it felt heavy, like the oxygen was being traded for something sharper. She knew before she'd even closed the door. The phone was face down on the console. She'd left it face up. She never left it face down. The screen cracked once from a fall and she'd learned the habit the hard way. Face up, always. The difference was small, maybe 2 inches of rotation. But it was there, and she registered it the way you register a chair moved 3 degrees out of place in a room you know by heart. She said nothing. She pulled out of the shoulder, checked the mirrors, rejoined the road. The engine ran clean. The heat worked. Outside, the visibility had opened up. Clouds thinning, the snow easing to something lighter, almost decorative. A better road than an hour ago by every objective measure. The man in the back seat was a pressure front. He lasted 4 minutes. "How long has he been doing mechanical work?" She kept her eyes forward. "Who?" "Your friend." The word landed with something underneath it. Not quite disdain, something that wanted to be disdain and wasn't quite getting there. "Years," she said. "Self-taught." "Does it matter?" "I'm asking." She adjusted her grip on the wheel. "He has a shop. He's good at what he does." "I'm sure he is." A pause that was doing a lot of work. "For the roads he works on." There it was. She let it sit for a moment. Let him think it had landed. Then, "He's certified in 6 different vehicle systems, including the one he just fixed on your car. But go ahead." Silence. He shifted in the seat. She could feel it, not see it, feel it. The way the leather moved, the way his weight redistributed. He was leaning forward. Not all the way, but closer to the front of the cab than he'd been since day one. "You left your phone on," he said. "I noticed." "On the console." "Yes." The dashboard lights caught the lower half of her face in the dark. Jaw, throat, the line of her collarbone under her coat collar. She stared at the road. "You're not going to ask me anything," he said. "No." "Why not?" "Because I already know." She said it the same way she said everything. Not raised, not performed, just certain. And so do you. The heat from the vents pushed steady between them. He was close enough now that she could hear his breathing without trying. That specific rhythm again. The one she'd catalogued during the cold, when the engine was dead and the blanket was between them. Except now, it wasn't slow. Now it had something in it. He's not, he started. Stopped. She waited. A man like that. In your life. He said it like he was selecting the words individually, carefully, and still not getting it right. You've thought about what that looks like? Professionally? She turned her head just slightly, not enough to take her eyes off the road, just enough so that her profile shifted toward him in the dark. Professionally, she repeated. You represent this vehicle, this company, what people associate with... Stop. He stopped. That's not what this is, she said. Try again. 5 seconds, maybe 6. The road unwound in the headlights, pale and straight. He put his hands on you. There it was, the real sentence. The one that had been sitting behind all the other ones. She exhaled once through her nose. He brushed snow off my shoulder. With a familiarity that suggests that we've known each other for 10 years. She said it cleanly. No heat, just the fact, dropped flat. 10 years. He's known my name for 10 years. He knew it the day we met. A beat. She let that one breathe. You've been in this car with me every morning for 24 days. The silence that followed was not like the other silences. This one had a shape. He didn't answer. She could feel him back there, very still now, and she knew, without seeing his face, without needing to, that the composure was costing him something. You're jealous, she said, not a question, not a provocation. Just a thing she said the way you'd say it's going to rain. Observational, direct, no particular interest in the reaction. The reaction came anyway. That's, he laughed, short and humorless. That's an extraordinary thing to say to your employer. Is it wrong? It's completely... Is it wrong? He stopped. The laugh was gone. Whatever had been underneath it was still there, though. She could feel it in the air, in the way the cab had gotten smaller in the last 30 seconds, in the way he was still leaning forward and hadn't moved back. You don't know what you're talking about, he said. Low, controlled. The voice of a man using control as the last tool he had. She turned back to the road. Okay, she said. Quiet. The wipers went once against a thin scatter of snow. The road curved and she followed it without slowing. He was still leaning forward. She could still feel the heat of his presence at the edge of the front seat. Too close for the arrangement of employer and driver, for the fiction they'd been maintaining for 24 mornings. He hadn't moved back, she didn't tell him to. That was its own answer, and they both knew it. The city lights appeared on the horizon 20 minutes later. A faint orange glow under the clouds, the world opening back up, the road widening from 2 lanes to 4, the weight of the mountains leaving the air. He finally sat back. She watched it happen in the corner of her eye. The retreat, the posture reassembling itself, the performance of composure clicking back into place like a lock. Almost convincing. We'll be there in 18 minutes, as she said. He said nothing, but his hands on his knees, they weren't still. The horizon didn't just disappear. It was erased. A sudden white sheet pulled over the world without warning, without sound, without mercy. She saw it coming maybe 4 seconds before it hit. A wall of white moving across the ridge to the left, dropping off the tree line like something falling. She had time to say, hold on, not loud, just firm, the voice you use when there's no room for questions. And then the whiteout swallowed the road whole. Not darkness, white, total, blinding, directionless white. And in it, nothing. No lane markers, no shoulder, no horizon, no reference point of any kind. Just the sound of wind hammering the side of the SUV like it had a score to settle. She lifted her foot off the accelerator, touched the brakes once, light, testing. The rear end moved. Wrong answer. She released the brakes and steered into the slide, right, then correcting left. But the shoulder was already under them, packed snow giving way to something softer, deeper. And then the front left wheel dropped and the car lurched hard to that side and stopped, stuck. The engine still running, the headlights pointing up at the storm at a useless angle. illuminating nothing but snow falling against more snow. Silence inside the car, except for the wind. Then, "Are you hurt?" His voice, from the back, tight. Controlled, but the first time in 24 days he'd asked her anything about her body. "No," she said. She tried reverse. The wheels spun without catching. She tried again. Nothing. The left side was buried to the door seam. "You?" "Fine." She killed the engine, left the hazards on, thought for exactly 3 seconds. "We have to get out." He didn't argue. That surprised her. She grabbed her coat from the passenger seat. She draped it there when she got back in after the repair, standard habit, always within reach. Pulled on her gloves, shouldered the door open against the wind. It fought her, tried to slam back. She held it with her hip and climbed out into the cold. The air hit her like a wall, -15, maybe colder with the wind chill coming off the ridge. Her eyes watered immediately. She came around to his door and pulled it open. He was already halfway out. Suit jacket, no gloves, dress shoes that were going to be useless in approximately 30 seconds. "Give me your jacket," she said. "It's a jacket, not a... It'll hold wind better than nothing. Give it to me. I need to tie something around your shoes or you'll be soaked through in 2 minutes." He looked at her for a moment in the blinding white and the howling wind, with his hair already destroyed by the gale and the snow sticking to his shoulders. Then he took the jacket off. She wrapped it around his shoes and ankles over the dress shoes. Not perfect, not waterproof, but something. Then she straightened up and pointed into the white. "There's a forestry post about 400 meters northeast. I've used it before. We stay together. We walk fast. We don't stop." He nodded once. They walked. He lasted about 90 meters before his foot broke through a crust of snow and went into the soft stuff underneath, mid-shin, and his weight shifted wrong, and he went sideways. Fast. No theatrical slow motion, just there 1 second, going down the next. She caught him. Her arm went across his chest from the right side, her shoulder taking the impact of his weight, and for a second they were both at a bad angle in the snow, his hand grabbing the first thing it found, her forearm gripping hard through the coat. She planted her feet and held. He was heavier than she'd calculated, by a lot. She pulled anyway. They got upright. Neither of them moved for a moment. The wind pushed sideways. His hand was still on her forearm through the fabric, and her arm was still across his chest, and they were close. Closer than they'd been in 24 days of sealed car and cold miles. And his face was right there, a foot away, snow in his eyebrows, jaw set, breathing hard. She let go first. "Watch the right side," she said. "The crust is thinner." He said nothing, but when they started walking again, he stayed half a step closer than before. The door to the forestry post was wooden and old and opened inward. She hit it with her shoulder and it gave, and they fell through into the dark together, and she pulled it shut behind them. The wind stopped, just stopped, or rather kept going on the other side of the door, but muffled now, reduced to a sound rather than a physical force. Inside, dark, and the smell of pine and old wood and cold that had been sitting still instead of moving. A small space, 2 windows shuttered from outside, a wood stove in the corner, a stack of split logs that had been there long enough to be completely dry. She found the pull string on a battery lantern hanging by the door. The light came up dim and yellow. They stood there, both breathing hard, both covered in snow that was already starting to melt against the relative warmth. His hair was wrecked. Her braids had snow packed into them along the top. They were looking at each other in the yellow light, 4 feet apart, the door at her back, the stove at his, and for a moment, neither of them moved or spoke. The wind howled against the shutters. Inside, nothing but the sound of them. She moved first, crossed to the stove, opened it, checked for blockage in the flue with a long-handled brush on the floor. Clean enough. She started building the fire, dry bark first, then kindling, then 2 of the smaller logs. "Take your coat off, Enna," she said. He was still standing where she'd left him. "The wet layers pull heat out of your core," she said. "You know how to start a fire, or you want me to do both?" He came to the stove, crouched across from her, took the lighter she handed over. "I know how to start a fire." "Then start it." He did, steadily, no fumbling. She sat back on her heels and watched, slightly surprised, and he caught her looking. "I wasn't always this," he said. He said it quietly and without elaboration, gesturing vaguely at himself, the remains of the suit, the ruined shoes, the posture that was still somehow contained despite everything. "I grew up with a wood stove." She absorbed that, said nothing. The fire caught, a small real warmth starting to push out into the room. She peeled off her outer coat and hung it on the hook by the door. Wet through at the shoulders, the sleeves. Her thermal underneath was damp at the cuffs but held. She unlaced her boots, pulled them off, set them near the stove. He was watching her do it. Not the way he'd watched her in the car, cataloguing, assessing, differently. The yellow light was low and honest, and it showed everything it touched without flattery or agenda. He took off the ruined dress shoes, set them beside her boots, peeled off his socks, soaked, useless, and held them for a moment like he wasn't sure what to do with them. She took them from his hand without comment and draped them over the log pile near the stove. He looked at her hands when she did it. She had a small scar on her left palm, curved about 2 inches, the kind from something specific. He didn't ask, wanted to. They sat on the floor near the stove because there was nowhere else. The fire was working now, the small room starting to hold the warmth, the cold retreating to the corners. Outside, the whiteout was total, no way to know how long it would last. She pulled her knees up and looked at the fire. He sat with his back against the wall, legs stretched out, the stove between them and to the side. Close enough that the warmth reached both. "You knew this place was here," he said. "I've driven this road for 3 years. You filed it away in case." "In case," she said. He was quiet for a moment, then, "That's how you think about everything, isn't it? In case." She looked at the fire. The log had caught fully and the light moved on the walls, unsteady, warmer than the lantern. "Somebody has to," she said. He didn't answer, but he didn't look away from her either. And the fire kept going, and the wind kept working at the door, and the snow outside kept falling on the ruined car and the empty road. And in the forestry post it was just the two of them, and the yellow light and the warmth of a fire that neither of them had built alone. Firelight doesn't hide secrets. It dances on them until they're impossible to ignore. The stove had been going for 20 minutes, and the room was warmer but not warm. The kind of cold that lives in walls and floors and ceiling beams doesn't leave in 20 minutes. It concedes the center of a room, maybe, pulls back from the fire. But it waits. She knew that. She'd sat in enough cold rooms to know that the fire only wins if you give it time. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, knees up, thermal sleeves pushed to her elbows. Her coat was still by the door, still damp. Her socks were drying near the stove on the edge of the log pile. He was on the other side of the stove. Same posture, different wall. His shirt was a dress shirt, cotton, long-sleeved, the kind that didn't handle damp well. It had dried unevenly, one cuff still darker than the other. His feet were bare. He'd draped his ruined socks over the stovepipe bracket, which she hadn't suggested, and the sight of it, the pragmatic, unself-conscious decision, had shifted something in the way she was reading him. The lantern battery was low. The room ran mostly on firelight now. She was looking at her left hand. She did it without meaning to, just rested her wrist on her knee and opened her palm and looked at the scar. 2 inches, curved, faded to silver on the brown of her palm. 7 years old now. She stopped seeing it most days. Something about the firelight made it visible again. "The bridge," he said. She looked up. He was watching her. Not intrusively, just the way people look at things in firelight when the normal architecture of polite attention has worn away. "The scar," he said. "What happened?" She considered not answering. Old habit, but the whiteout was outside, and the fire was between them, and she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "Construction site," she said. "3rd year of university. I was doing a summer internship. Structural survey on a bridge rehabilitation project. There was a steel edge I didn't see in time." She turned her palm over. 12 stitches. He was quiet. "The day I got back from the hospital," she said. "My mother called, 1st stage, they weren't sure yet how far." She closed her hand. "I finished the internship, but I knew, driving home on the last day, that I wasn't going back in the fall." The fire popped once, a knot in the wood letting go. "And you didn't tell anyone," he said, not a question. "Who would I tell?" He looked at the stove. "You just absorbed it," he said, "changed direction, kept moving. What else do you do?" He didn't answer that. She got the feeling it wasn't a rhetorical question he knew the answer to. She shifted. The floor was hard, and the cold from the boards was starting to work through her thermal. She moved closer to the stove, not much, maybe 2 feet, and sat with her legs angled toward the heat. He moved too, not toward her, just the same direction, the logic of warmth being what it was. They ended up roughly side by side, the stove in front of them both, a foot of space between their shoulders. She could feel him next to her the way you feel weather. Something in the air pressure, something about the specific weight of that much person that close. He spoke first, which surprised her. "My father flew in last month," he said. She didn't say anything. Let it come at whatever speed it came. 3 hours. Dinner at the restaurant he always picks, the one where the tables are far enough apart that nobody can hear anything. He ordered for both of us. He does that. A pause. He ran through the quarters numbers, told me the acquisition in the spring had been handled wrong, not how he would have done it. He stopped, picked up a small piece of bark from the floor near the log pile, turned it over in his hands. He didn't ask one question about me, not one. 3 hours. The fire. "He never did," he said. "Not when I was 12, not when I was 19 and starting the first one. Not now." He dropped the bark. "He'd look at whatever I built and tell me how he would have built it differently." That's what he called it. Guidance. She looked at the side of his face in the firelight, the jaw that was always set, always controlled, resting now. Not gone, just resting. "And you built everything trying to make him say it differently," she said. He looked at her. "Trying to make him say it was right," she said. "The way you did it." A long pause. The wind found a gap somewhere in the roofline and made a low, desolate sound. He looked back at the fire. "I didn't know that's what I was doing," he said, "until about 40 minutes ago." She didn't know what to do with that, so she didn't do anything. Just sat there in the firelight with her scarred palm open on her knee, letting him be somewhere honest for a minute without turning it into something that required a response. He looked at her hand. Then he reached over. Not fast, not tentative either, just deliberate. He picked up her left hand with both of his and turned it palm up in the firelight, and he looked at the scar the way you look at something that cost someone something. His thumb traced the length of it once, from the heel of her palm to the base of her middle finger, slow. She let him. She didn't know why she let him. Or maybe she did and wasn't ready to say it. "You were going to build bridges," he said. "I was going to try." "You would have." She looked at her hand in his, at the contrast of his thumb on her palm. "You don't know that. I've watched you drive for 24 days, he said. "You think in systems. You read problems 300 feet ahead. You don't panic when things fail. You recalculate." He set her hand down carefully on her knee, but he didn't move his away. Not right away. It rested beside hers for a moment, barely touching, just the sides of their hands in contact. "You would have built very good bridges." She looked at the fire. Something moved in her chest that she chose not to examine too closely. The tremor started small. She felt it in her own shoulders first, not dramatic, just the deep kind of cold that works its way up from the floor and finds the spaces where your body has been burning energy for hours and has nothing left to burn. She tightened her arms around her knees. It didn't stop. He felt it. She knew because his head turned. "Don't," she said, preemptive. "You're shaking. It'll pass." He looked at her for a moment. Then he moved. Not asking, just moving, the same way she'd moved when she wrapped his jacket around his shoes in the snow. Practical. No ceremony. He came close enough that his arm was against hers, and the side of his body was against the side of hers, and stopped there. Solid. Warm. Real. She went very still. He was looking at the fire, not at her, giving her somewhere to put her eyes that wasn't his face, which was, she recognized this, a kind of care. Not the kind that came with strings, the kind that understood she needed the exit. The tremor slowed. Stopped. She didn't move away, neither did he. They stayed like that while the fire worked, and the wind ran itself ragged against the walls, and the night pressed down on the small lit room from all sides. His shoulder was warm against hers. His breathing was slow again, the steady rhythm she'd learned in the car, that she'd catalogued without meaning to. At some point her head dipped. Not all the way, just dropped slightly toward the line of his shoulder. She caught it, pulled back up. He didn't react, but something in the arm he had pressed against hers became, almost imperceptibly, less like a shoulder beside hers and more like a shoulder offered. She didn't take it, but she didn't move away. The fire burned. The wind tried the door. Outside, the whiteout had no idea that inside this room something had become irreversible, without either of them having done a single thing to make it so. She looked at his hands resting on his knees, not pressed flat this time. Just resting. Still. First time she'd seen his hands still. At some point, without waking him, she picked up her phone. The signal was thin, but there. She sent her location to Dex, a pin, nothing else, no message. He'd understand, he always did. She turned back to the fire and said nothing. It didn't feel like silence. The phone on the floor buzzed, a mechanical heart reminding them that the world was still waiting. The fire had gone to coals. She didn't know when she'd fallen asleep. Not deep sleep, just that thin. Exhausted half under where your body stops pretending it can keep going. She came back to the room in pieces. The orange glow of the coals, the smell of wood smoke, the cold that had crept back in from the corners while the fire wound down. The wind outside had dropped, not gone but reduced to something that moved rather than attacked. She was still against the wall. He was still beside her. Closer than he'd been when she'd drifted. Close enough that when she came back to herself, she was aware of the exact places where their arms were touching and didn't move to change them. She looked at the window. The shutter showed thin lines of lighter grey at the edges. Not dawn, not quite. But the dark had turned a different colour. The phone buzzed on the floor where she'd left it. She reached for it before she was fully awake, muscle memory, and looked at the screen. Dex. She sat up. The movement pulled her away from his warmth, and the cold filled the gap immediately. Efficient and indifferent. She pressed answer. Hey. Hey. His voice had road noise behind it, engine sound. I've been moving since 4. Storm cleared enough to get through on 9. Where exactly are you? The pin you sent last night put you about a mile east of Burn Ridge. Forestry post. You'll see the SUV in the ditch before you see the building. It's set back from the road about 400 meters into the trees. Okay, 5 minutes, maybe 10. A beat. Kane with you? She paused half a second. Yes. Okay. No follow-up. No questions. Just drive slow. The shoulder's bad. I know how to drive, Nadia. I know you do. Drive slow anyway. She heard him laugh, quiet, and hung up. The man beside her was awake. She knew before she looked. The quality of his stillness had changed from the stillness of sleep to the stillness of someone lying very still on purpose. She stood up, reached for her coat by the door. It had dried most of the way through, stiff at the collar, and she pulled it on and started working the buttons. He sat up. He didn't reach for anything, just sat there on the floor with his back against the wall, arms resting on his knees, watching her button her coat with an expression she couldn't fully read in the coals light. Not blank. The opposite of blank. That was him, he said. Yes. How long? 10 minutes, maybe less. He said nothing. She pulled on her boots, laced them, stood. Her braids were a disaster. She reached back and tightened the tie, not fixing it, just containing it. She could feel him watching her do it. She grabbed his shoes from beside the stove, still damp at the toe but wearable. She held them out. He took them, didn't put them on yet, just held them and looked at the floor, and she watched something move through his face that he wasn't trying to stop. You're going to get in his truck, he said. Yes. And drive back. That's generally what a rescue looks like. Don't do that. She looked at him. Don't do what? The thing you do. He set the shoes down. He stopped. Ran one hand across his face, heel of his palm pressing into his forehead for a second, and the gesture was so un-CEO of him that she went still watching it. The sarcasm as a wall. Don't. Not right now. She didn't say anything. He got up. One motion, no performance of stiffness or cold. He crossed the small room and stopped in front of her, not the width of the car between them, not the width of a console, 2 feet, less. The coals threw dim red light from the side, and the grey of early dawn came in thin lines at the shutters, and it was just enough to see his face clearly. Close enough that she could see the specific line between where he'd made a decision and where he hadn't yet. "Say what you're saying," she said. "Quiet." "I don't—" He stopped, started again. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "This." His jaw moved. "I know how to run a negotiation. I know how to read a room. I know how to wait out a counterpart until they fold. I've been doing that since I was 19, and none of it—" He looked at her, direct, no deflection. "None of that is what this is, and I don't have another language." Outside, the wind. Her bird somewhere. The first one, testing the morning. "He knew your name in a day, Hund," he said. "I know that. I know what that means about me, and I know it's not. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I just—" He stopped again. She waited. "I can't stand the idea of you walking out that door and getting into his truck and going back to your life. And in 2 days, everything goes back to what it was." He said it the way he'd talked about his father. Flat, not performed. Like the words were costing him something and he was paying anyway. "I can't stand the idea of sitting in the back of that car on Monday morning and having you be the person who doesn't exist to me again." She held his gaze. "You made me not exist," she said. "Not hard, just true." "I know. 24 mornings. I know." The coals shifted in the stove, settling, a sound like a slow exhale. His shoes were still on the floor between them, forgotten. She took one step back. Not away, just back, until her shoulders touched the wall behind her. The move didn't put more distance between them. It put the wall behind her so there was nowhere else to go, and something in the way she did it. Deliberate, eyes on him, not retreating but planting, changed the air in the room. He came forward. Not fast. He wasn't a man who moved fast when it mattered. He stopped close enough that she could feel the heat he'd been generating against her for the last several hours, close enough to see the hollow at the base of his throat and the wrecked collar of his dress shirt, and the fact that his jaw was working like he was still choosing words. "Tell me not to," he said. Low. She looked at him. "If you want to walk out and get in that truck and be done with all of this, tell me, I'll open the door." He put one hand against the wall beside her shoulder, not trapping, more like he needed something to hold on to. "But I need you to tell me." Outside, the sound arrived before the light, a diesel engine, slow, working through snow. She saw the moment he heard it too. The way his eyes moved toward the window, and the line of his jaw went tight, and he looked back at her like a man who'd just heard the timer, on something that mattered. Go off. Her heart was doing something she chose not to examine. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "I know you drive like you're thinking 6 steps ahead of everyone else on the road. I know you have a scar on your hand from a bridge you were going to build. I know you stayed with your mother instead of finishing the degree. I know your sarcasm is the thing you use when someone's getting too close." He was very still. "And I know that you haven't told me to stop." The headlights swept the shutters, a slow arc, then steady, the truck parked outside. She was still looking at him. He was close enough that when she exhaled, he felt it. She could see that in the slight shift of his expression, the way his focus dropped for a fraction of a second to her mouth and came back up. She put her hand flat on his chest. Not pushing, just stopping the distance from closing the rest of the way. Her palm against the cotton of his shirt, and underneath it his heart. And it was not steady, not even close to steady. "We'll be late," she said. He looked at her hand on his chest. Nadia. Her name. The way he said it. Not a tool, not a calculation. Just her name said by a man who understood, maybe for the first time, the difference. She dropped her hand, stepped sideways, out from between him and the wall. "Put your shoes on," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Dex has been driving since 4. She pushed the door open. The cold came in full and clean and sharp. Nothing like the dead cold of the long night. This was morning cold, alive, with the smell of pine and wet snow and open sky. The storm had moved east, and what was left of it was just scattered cloud and a horizon going pale grey to pale gold. She didn't look back, but she heard him behind her, the sound of him moving, the sound of his shoes, the sound of the door pulled shut. He was right behind her when she reached the truck. The SUV felt different now. The leather didn't smell like defiance anymore. It smelled like an ending. Dex didn't ask questions. That was the thing about him. He read a room the same way he read an engine, efficiently, without sentimentality, and without broadcasting what he found. He'd pulled the SUV out of the ditch in 11 minutes, hooked the winch to the chassis, done the work with his hands and his truck, and a quiet competence that required no audience. He'd handed Nadia a travel cup without comment. She'd taken it. At some point during the winching, Dex had looked up from the chassis and caught her eye across the hood. Just for a second. The look wasn't about the car. She knew that. He held it for one beat, the look of a man who had known her for 10 years, reading something new in her face and filing it away without comment. And then he went back to the winch. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. The three of them had driven back in a convoy of 2, her in the SUV, Dex behind in the truck, and the whole thing had taken 4 hours on roads that were still bad but passable. He hadn't looked at the man in the back seat once. The man in the back seat, Mike Kane, though she'd only heard the name said out loud for the first time that morning, through the phone. In Dex's flat and unbothered voice, had sat with his hands on his knees and his eyes mostly out the window, and said nothing for the entire 4 hours. Not one word. Not about the roads, not about the delay, not about his schedule, or his phone, or the day that had existed before a whiteout ate it. He just sat there and watched the mountains go by, and occasionally she felt the weight of his attention move to the back of her head and stay. She let it. The property came into view at 11:17. Not a house, an address that existed in a category beyond house. Stone and glass against the mountain, the kind of architecture that says, I did not build this to be comfortable. I built this to be seen. The gate opened on approach, sensors in the pillar, and the SUV moved through and up the private drive, and the gravel was cleared and salted, and the world was clean and cold and bright in the morning sun. She pulled up to the entrance and stopped. Cut the engine. The silence came back. Different from all the other silences. Not the sealed silence of a moving car. Not the close silence of the forestry post. This was outdoor silence, open air, with the sound of the gate mechanism closing behind them, and somewhere to the left, a shovel working against stone. The ordinary sounds of a world that had not been interrupted. She put the car in park and left her hands on the wheel. Through the glass front of the main entrance she could see movement, someone inside seeing the car arrive, already reaching for a phone. He didn't open his door. She'd expected it, the click of the handle, the cold air coming in, the sound of his shoes on the gravel, the clean automatic end of the arrangement. Instead, nothing. Just the tick of the engine cooling. She watched the entrance in the windshield. The person inside was talking into a phone now, looking out at the car, waiting. 15 seconds. 20. You should go in, she said. They're waiting. I know. You have a full day. I know. A pause. I don't care. She looked at her hands on the wheel. You're going to care tomorrow, she said. When the calls start and the quarter's not... Nadia. She stopped. Look at me, he said. She turned. Not the rear view, actually turned, rotating in the seat so she was facing the back of the car, the console between them, the divide that had been the whole architecture of 24 mornings. He was looking at her with the same expression he'd had in the forestry post when the headlights swept the window. Not the CEO, not the man in the quarterly review, or the man ordering for both of them at tables set too far apart. Just a man on the wrong side of a bad decision he was still deciding whether to make. I need to tell you something, he said, and I need you to not use the sarcasm. I'm not yet, you will, wait. He leaned forward, forearms on the back of the front seat the same way he'd leaned during the whiteout, and the position put his face close enough that she could see the crease across his collar from the night on the floor and the tiredness around his eyes that was real and not performed. 24 days. Every morning I got in this car and I treated you like a function, like something the agency sent. His jaw moved. And I knew your name was in the file. I didn't read it. She said nothing. Not because I forgot, because if I read it, you'd become a person. And I was very efficient at not letting people become people. He held her gaze. It was the most useful skill my father ever taught me. I've been unlearning it for about 12 hours. Outside, the person at the entrance had come through the door now and was standing at the top of the stone steps, coat on, tablet in hand, visibly uncertain about whether to approach the car. She didn't look away from him. "What do you want me to do with that?" she said. "Nothing." He exhaled. "I want you to know it, that's all. That I know what I did. That I know the 24 days are, I know what they were." His hand came off the seat back, and for a second it hovered in the space between them, above the console. Not quite an offer, not quite a reach. "I don't want Monday morning to be the same as the morning before the storm. I can't—" He stopped. "I cannot sit in this car and have you be invisible again." She should have said something measured. She had measured things ready, about the contract, about the nature of what they were, about how 12 hours in a forestry post did not undo the arithmetic of the arrangement. She had all of that lined up. What came out instead was, "You made me invisible. Yes, that's not a small thing. No, it's not. And you saying you know it doesn't— I know it doesn't fix it." He said it right over her, not loud, just sure. "I'm not asking you to pretend it does. I'm asking you to—" He stopped. For a moment, he looked almost frustrated, not at her, at himself, at the specific and humiliating difficulty of a language he didn't have. "I'm asking you to not disappear. Past that, I don't know yet. I don't have the rest of it worked out." She looked at him. "That's the most honest thing you've said in 24 days, she said. "I'm aware of the irony." "Are you?" "The timing is— yes, I'm aware." She turned back to face the windshield. The assistant on the steps had retreated to the doorway but hadn't gone back inside. The gravel drive was empty and clean. The morning was cold and bright, and completely indifferent to what was happening inside the car. She could open her door, walk around to the back, open his, return to the structure of it, driver and passenger, function and employer. The agency would send the same car tomorrow and the arrangement would reassemble itself the way arrangements do. Efficiently, without ceremony, without anyone having to acknowledge that it had ever been anything else. She could do that. Her hand moved to the door handle. "There's a bridge," she said. She wasn't looking at him. Her hand was on the handle. "On the Marrick County line. I surveyed it in my second year, and it was part of the internship. They finally rebuilt it 6 years ago. Different firm, different team, nothing I contributed. But the approach is the same as the original survey recommended, and every time I drive over it I can feel that." Her thumb moved against the handle. "It's not mine. It will never be mine. But I know it the way I know where the shoulder goes soft on Route 9. Silence behind her. "I've been driving over other people's bridges for 7 years, she said. "I'm very good at it, and I'm tired." She heard him move. Not the door, not his door, something else, the console latch, the creak of leather as weight redistributed. She turned. He had come over the console. Not gracefully. There was nothing graceful about a 6-foot man in a ruined dress shirt clearing a center console in the front seat of an SUV, and she had about 1 second to register the implausibility of it before he was there, in the passenger seat, and then leaning across the last foot of distance, and then— not gentle. Not the soft, cinematic approach. His hand came to the side of her face, and the kiss was immediate, full. No negotiation, the kind that happens when two people have been having the same argument from opposite sides for 24 days, and both of them are finally, furiously done arguing. She felt it in her sternum, in the back of her knees. His other hand found the headrest and the leather, and she reached up without deciding to, and her fingers caught the wrecked collar of his shirt the way you catch something you've been watching fall. The world outside the car continued to exist. The assistant at the door, the morning, the mountain, the gravel, inside the car, just this. The taste of bad road coffee and cold air and something underneath both of those that had been there probably since day 3 or day 7 or day 1, waiting for someone to stop maintaining the distance. He pulled back first, not far. His forehead came down against hers, and they stayed like that, both breathing, the hand still on her face, her fingers still in his collar, the console digging into his ribs in a way he was clearly ignoring. "Build one," he said, low, right there. "Build one that's yours." She looked at him. "I have engineers. I have 3 infrastructure projects sitting in permitting, and not one of them has a lead I actually trust." He pulled back enough to see her face. "I'm not offering you a job, He stopped. "I don't know what I'm offering. I don't have the language yet, but I'll learn it." Outside, the assistant had taken 2 steps toward the car and stopped again, very professionally unsure. She looked at the hand on her face, at the collar she was still holding. She let go of the collar. "You're going to have to get out of this car," she said. "I know. Your assistant looks like she's going to have a medical event." "Probably." He didn't move his hand. "Monday." "What about Monday? What time do you leave the depot?" She looked at him, at the face she'd been reading in fragments, through glass, through mirrors, through firelight, for 24 days. Up close, with the morning coming through the windshield, it was just a face. Tired. Certain. Waiting. "Mike," she said. His name. First time. The word sat in the air between them like something released. He went very still. 6:15, she said. Something crossed his face, quick, almost gone before it landed. Not the 6:15, the way she'd said it. His name in her voice for the first time, like it meant something different coming from her. Like it was a different name. "I'll be ready at 6:15, he said. He got out. She watched him through the windshield, the walk to the entrance, the assistant falling into step beside him, the tablet appearing. 20 meters from the car, he was already in it, already nodding at something she was saying, already the architecture of the day reassembling itself around him. But at the top of the steps before the door, he turned, looked back at the car. She was watching. She didn't pretend she wasn't. He held it for 2 seconds, then went inside. She sat in the idling car for a moment, alone for the first time since a whiteout had eaten Route 9, and dropped them both into something that had no clause in the contract. She put the car in reverse, pulled out of the drive. On the Merrick County line there was a bridge with a particular approach, a long, patient curve that ran flush against the grade of the hill, the kind of engineering that looks effortless because someone, somewhere, did the work to make it so. She drove over it on the way back, same as always. She felt it in her hands through the wheel, the geometry of it, and the specific rightness. But this time, for the first time in 7 years, she didn't just drive over it. She thought about what she would build next, 4 months later. The blueprints on her desk were the Merrick County Bridge expansion, 43 pages, her handwriting in the margins, the kind of dense annotation that meant she'd been over it more than once, and trusted herself more than once, and changed her mind more than once. The hard hat on the corner of the desk was yellow and dented, and had her name on the side in black marker, written by her, practical, no thought to it. She was the only one in the office still working. That wasn't unusual. The site meeting that afternoon had run 2 hours over because the subcontractor from the eastern approach had brought specs that didn't account for the spring melt load, and Nadia had caught it in the first 15 minutes and spent the next 45 walking him through exactly why the numbers didn't hold. The other engineers had watched the exchange the way you watch someone diffuse something, very still, very attentive, not breathing in case the breath changed something. The subcontractor had taken the notes. He hadn't argued after the first 15 minutes. At the back of the temporary structure, near the site trailer door, Mike Kane stood with his arms crossed and said nothing. He had looked at the blueprints when she pointed at them, and at the grade when she gestured toward it, and when the meeting was over and everyone filed out, she heard him tell the project coordinator quietly, "She's right about the load. Revise the eastern approach before Friday. Not my engineer says, not the team lead says, she's right, she'd filed that away. Let it sit warm somewhere she didn't examine too closely." Now the office was empty, and the Denver skyline was doing its thing through the floor-to-ceiling glass, all lit towers and cold, clear dark, and she was going through the Merrick margins one more time because she'd been thinking about the drainage calculation for the north shoulder and wanted to. Her phone lit up on the desk, not hers, his. Mike had left it when he went to get coffee, set it face up on the corner of her desk the way she always left hers, which she'd noticed and said nothing about. The screen read, Dad. Thursday, 6th, 15 p.m. She looked at the phone, looked at the door to the small kitchen at the back of the office, where she could hear him moving, the sound of the coffee machine, a cabinet. The phone kept ringing. Mike came back in before it stopped, coffee in one hand, jacket in the other. He'd taken it off somewhere in the last hour and she hadn't clocked when. He saw the phone, looked at the screen. The expression that crossed his face was the one she'd learned to read in a forestry post by firelight. The specific weight of a man deciding which version of himself to be. He picked up the phone. I can't talk tonight, he said. No preamble, no apology, just that. I'm with Nadia, I'll call you Sunday. A pause. She watched the side of his face. Because Sunday works better for me. Another pause, shorter. Good night. He set the phone down, face up. She looked at the blueprints. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know. He set the coffee on her desk. Her order, black. No sugar, the thing he'd stopped having to ask 4 months ago. I wanted to. He pulled a chair around to her side of the desk and sat next to her, not across. That was another thing that had changed. He'd stopped taking the position of opposition as a default. She'd noticed that too. North shoulder, she said, tapping the page. The drainage assumes a consistent grade, but there's a microslope on the eastern edge that isn't in the original survey. If we don't account for it, we get pooling inside 3 years. He leaned forward, looked where she was pointing. He'd learned to read blueprints, not fluently, not like her, but enough to follow when she talked. He'd done that deliberately, she knew. Had sat with the documents at his own desk at home until the notation made sense, never asking her to slow down or simplify. She'd walked in on him doing it once, at 11 at night, and said nothing. He'd said, without looking up, "The drainage annotation. Does the arrow indicate flow or grade?" She'd told him. He'd nodded and made a note. "So we recalculate the eastern edge," he said now. "We flag it for the site survey team. I need actual measurements before I touch the numbers." She capped her pen. "Which means one more site visit. I'll drive." She looked at him. He looked back, straight, not the rear view. "You'll drive," she said. "I've been practicing. You grew up with a wood stove. Does that extend to mountain roads in February?" "Probably not." He picked up his coffee. "But I'll drive the first 40 miles and then you can take over and judge me the whole way." "That's an efficient arrangement." "I thought so." She stacked the pages back into the folder and pulled the elastic around it. A habit, always the same motion. And he watched her do it with that particular quality of attention she'd first registered through a rear-view mirror on a white road. Not cataloguing anymore, just watching, the way you watch something that's yours. Not possession, something different. The way you watch a thing you chose and keep choosing. She stood, reached for her coat on the back of the chair. "The Marek survey," he said. "You were right about the structural load on the western span." "I know. I had 2 other engineers look at it." "I know that too." She pulled on the coat. "They agreed with me, I assume." "Unanimously." "Good. You're paying for the expertise." She picked up her bag. "Remember that the next time you second-guess the drainage annotation." "I didn't second-guess." "You had that look." "I don't have a look." "You have 17 looks. I've catalogued them." She turned off the desk lamp. The room went to the blue light of the city through the windows. "That one means, are you sure?" And yes, I'm always sure about structural loads. He stood, came around the desk. Stopped close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. The specific warmth she'd first felt in a car that had gone cold on a mountain road, rationed under a thermal blanket that wasn't big enough for 2. His hand came up, tucked a loose braid back behind her ear, the same one that always came loose by the end of the day, and she never clipped it back properly because she'd never cared enough, and he'd stopped expecting her to. She looked at him, no console between them, no partition, glass or otherwise, no rear view, just this. 5 minutes for the north shoulder note, she said. Take 10. I said 5. I know. He didn't move. Take 10 anyway. I'll wait. She went back to the desk and made the annotation. Precise 4 lines. The kind of note that saves a bridge from a problem it won't develop for 3 years. She did it because the bridge mattered more than the dinner reservation, and he understood that, had built that understanding into the architecture of everything that came after a whiteout on Route 9. Outside, somewhere across the city, Dex's shop was running the maintenance rotation on the 2 excavators she'd deployed to the Marek site. She'd contracted him direct, had walked into the shop on a Tuesday morning 2 months ago, blueprints under her arm, and said, "I need someone who reads machines better than the manual. Are you interested?" He'd looked at her for a moment, read something in her face that he'd always been good at reading, and said, "Yeah, I'm interested." That had been the whole conversation. She kept the pen, closed the folder, stood. He was waiting by the door the way she'd once waited in a parking structure in the cold engine running, eyes on the entrance, not impatient, just present, ready when she was. She turned off the last light. Some bridges are built of steel, others are built of silence, a few cold nights, and the courage to finally be seen. She'd built both kinds now. She knew which one held more weight.